I'm Archie, 31, the invisible middle child in a family that always had spotlights reserved for my sisters. Growing up in Boston's suburbs meant comfort but never belonging. When Mom announced Emma's graduation gift, a 5-star Maldives resort vacation, while my promotion gathered dust in conversation, something finally broke inside me. That night, I made my decision. No arguments. No dramatic exit. Just a house key left on the kitchen table before I disappeared from their lives completely. Before I tell you how I vanished from my family's life, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own home. Let me paint you a picture of the Matthews family. Dad, Harold Matthews, investment banker extraordinaire, worked 60-hour weeks at a prestigious firm in downtown Boston. He wore tailored suits, drove German cars, and was physically present but emotionally absent throughout most of my childhood. Mom, Catherine, built her identity around being the perfect socialite. She ran 3 different charity committees, hosted immaculate dinner parties, and micromanaged our lives with spreadsheets and calendar alerts. Then there were my sisters. Jessica, my older sister by 3 years, was the academic prodigy valedictorian, Harvard graduate, now a successful corporate attorney married to a surgeon. Emma, younger than me by 5 years, was the baby of the family and Mom's clear, favorite, charming, artistic, the one whose school plays and recitals could never be missed. And then there was me, stuck in the middle. Not quite as academically brilliant as Jessica, not quite as naturally charming as Emma. I was the kid who got solid B+s without much effort, but could never quite reach those perfect A's that Jessica seemed to produce effortlessly. I played baseball reasonably well, but wasn't a star athlete. I took piano lessons for 8 years but never had that natural talent Emma displayed the moment she touched an instrument. Our family home was a 5-bedroom colonial in Wellesley, one of Boston's most affluent suburbs. 4,000 square feet of pristine architecture sitting on a perfectly manicured acre. I had my own bedroom, of course, but it somehow felt like a guest room compared to my sister's personalized spaces. Emma's room had been professionally decorated 3 times as she grew up. Mine kept the same blue paint and baseball pennants from when I was 12. The pattern was established early. When Jessica won her school science fair in 5th grade, we went to Disney World. When Emma got a small role in a community theater production at 9, Mom threw a party with 50 guests. When I made the honor roll 6 semesters in a row, I got a good job sport from Dad and a gift card to Barnes & Noble. Even after college, the pattern continued. I graduated with a computer science degree from Boston University, not Harvard like Jessica, as Mom often reminded me, and secured a job at a respected tech firm downtown. I worked hard, earned promotions, bought myself a decent 1-bedroom apartment in Cambridge. But at family gatherings, the conversation always revolved around Jessica's latest case or Emma's art exhibition. My software development projects might as well have been invisible. "Your sisters just have more interesting careers to talk about," Mom once said when I called her out on it. It stung because she didn't even try to deny it. My best friend Tyler was the first person who really pointed out how abnormal this was. We met in college and stayed close, working at the same company for a while before he moved to marketing. "Dude, the way they treat you isn't normal," he said after witnessing a particularly painful Thanksgiving where my parents spent 20 minutes praising Emma's mediocre pottery while completely ignoring my recent promotion to senior developer. "It's just how my family is," I replied with a shrug that had become my standard response. "That doesn't make it right," Tyler insisted. "You're successful, stable, a good person. Most parents would be bragging about you nonstop." I'd been conditioned to believe I was just less interesting, less accomplished, less worthy of attention than my sisters. It's amazing how family dynamics can warp your self-perception until you believe you deserve the scraps of attention you're given. 2 months ago, I landed a major promotion to lead developer on our company's most important project, a healthcare system that would potentially help thousands of patients. It came with a significant salary increase and team management responsibilities. When I called Mom to share the news, she listened for approximately 45 seconds before changing the subject to Emma's law school graduation coming up. "That's nice, honey," she said in that distracted tone I knew too well. "Did I tell you Emma made law review in her final year? We're so proud." I remember staring at my phone after hanging up, wondering why I even bothered. This was the backdrop against which everything that followed would unfold: years of emotional neglect packaged in upper-middle-class comfort, where all my physical needs were met, while my need for recognition and love remained unfulfilled. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in May. Mom had summoned the entire family to discuss Emma's law school graduation celebration. These family meetings were never actually about family input. They were Mom's way of announcing decisions she'd already made and expecting universal approval. The dining room in my parents' house always intimidated me. The antique mahogany table could seat 12, crystal chandelier overhead, china cabinet displaying wedding gifts that had barely been used in 30 years. Everything perfect, everything formal, everything designed to showcase the ideal family Mom had curated. Jessica arrived with her husband, Richard, both still in their work clothes, matching power suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Emma bounced in last, fashionably late as usual, wearing casual designer clothes that somehow still looked appropriate for the occasion. Now that everyone's here, Mom began, shooting a pointed look at Emma that contained none of the irritation it would have if I'd been the late one. "I want to discuss how we're celebrating Emma's graduation next month." Dad nodded from the head of the table, already agreeing with whatever was coming. He'd perfected the art of marital diplomacy over 35 years. Let Catherine handle the family matters. Don't rock the boat. Focus on providing financially. "Law school graduation is such an achievement," Mom continued, beaming at Emma, "especially from a top 10 school, and with honors." Emma smiled, that effortless smile that had charmed teachers, peers, and family members her entire life. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm pretty proud of myself." "As you should be." Mom reached over to squeeze her hand, which is why Dad and I have decided on a special graduation gift. I took a sip of water, already knowing whatever was coming wouldn't be comparable to what I'd received after college graduation, a watch and a dinner at a nice restaurant. Mom's eyes lit up with excitement. "We're taking Emma on a 2-week trip to the Maldives. 5-star resort, private beach bungalow, the works." Emma squealed with delight while Jessica made appropriate sounds of approval. Dad nodded, smiling at his youngest daughter's happiness. "The Maldives?" I finally managed. "That's extravagant." Mom dismissed my comment with a wave. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime achievement that deserves a once-in-a-lifetime celebration." I wanted to point out that Jessica and I had also graduated from college and graduate programs respectively, yet neither of us had received international luxury vacations. But I knew how that would go. I'd be labeled the jealous brother, the one who couldn't just be happy for his sister. "When do you leave?" I asked instead. "Next Thursday," Mom replied. "We'll be gone for 15 days. I've already arranged everything." It dawned on me then that we meant the 3 of them, Mom, Dad, and Emma. I wasn't even being invited as an afterthought. I cleared my throat. I actually had some news, too. I got a promotion at work. I'm leading the healthcare project now. "That's nice, dear," Mom said without missing a beat or asking a single question. "Now, Emma, I was thinking you might want to get some new resort wear before we go." And just like that, my achievement evaporated into the ether, not even worth a moment's acknowledgement. Emma launched into a detailed discussion of what she might pack. Mom offered shopping suggestions. Jessica chimed in with advice about resort etiquette in the Maldives. She and Richard had honeymooned there, of course. I sat silently, pushing food around my plate, feeling like I was watching my family through glass. Observing but not participating, present but not seen. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee, Dad briefly patted my shoulder. "Congratulations on that work thing, son." He couldn't even remember what my promotion was, 5 minutes after I'd mentioned it. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and familiar roads. I called Tyler from my car, using the hands-free system. "They're taking her to the Maldives, thank you. A 5-star resort for 2 weeks. "Let me guess," he replied. "Your promotion barely registered." It didn't register at all. Mom literally said, "That's nice," and went right back to discussing Emma's swimsuit options. Tyler was quiet for a moment. "Arch, I don't want to overstep, but at some point, you have to stand up for yourself. This isn't just normal family favoritism. This is them treating you like you don't matter." "What am I supposed to do? Demand a vacation too?" "No, but you could tell them how this makes you feel. Or you could stop showing up to be their emotional punching bag." I remember laughing humorlessly. "Yeah, maybe I should just disappear. See if they even notice I'm gone." It was a throwaway comment, the kind of hyperbolic statement friends make when venting. Neither of us knew then that those careless words would crystallize into an actual plan within days. That night, lying in bed staring at my ceiling, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of being overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted suddenly felt unbearable. The Maldives vacation wasn't the cause. It was merely the final straw, the culmination of a pattern that had defined my entire existence within the Matthews family. The morning after the dinner, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The hurt and anger had crystallized into something harder, more resolute. I called in sick to work something I rarely did and spent the day in my apartment thinking. At some point during that long, quiet day, I pulled out old family photo albums I'd taken when Mom was decluttering, which meant throwing away things that didn't feature her favorite child prominently. I flipped through birthdays, holidays, vacations, looking at my own face in these captured moments. In almost every photo, I was slightly off-center, sometimes partially cut off, often looking at my family rather than at the camera, as if I was already half observer rather than full participant. Then I found a birthday card from my 22nd birthday, the one where neither of my parents had attended my college graduation because Emma had a dance recital the same weekend. Inside, beneath the pre-printed message, Mom had written, "Sorry we missed your ceremony, Archie. You'll understand when you're older how important it is to support your sister's passions. Love, Mom. You'll understand when you're older." The phrase she trotted out whenever she couldn't justify her blatant favoritism, the phrase that implied, someday I'd agree with being treated as less than, the phrase that had followed me through childhood disappointments, teenage heartbreaks, and adult achievements deemed unworthy of celebration. Something snapped inside me, not in a violent or destructive way, but in the way a prisoner might feel when they finally decide the cage is unlockable. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted peace, freedom, a life where my value wasn't determined by comparison to my sisters. I opened my laptop and began researching. My company had offices in several cities. Seattle had always appealed to me. The tech scene was vibrant, the natural scenery beautiful, and most importantly, it was 3,000 miles from Boston. The next day, I spoke with my boss. "A transfer to Seattle?" he repeated, looking surprised. "This is unexpected, Archie, especially with your promotion. The team here is counting on your leadership." "I understand," I said, "but the project can be managed remotely, at least partially. I could fly back for critical meetings, and the Seattle office has been wanting to expand their healthcare division." He studied me for a moment. "Is everything okay? This seems sudden." I gave him the simplified version, family issues, need for a fresh start. He was understanding enough, and my work record was strong. By the end of the week, the transfer was approved. I'd start in Seattle in 3 weeks. With that cornerstone in place, everything else followed logically. I found an apartment in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood, not downtown, but close enough for a reasonable commute. I arranged for a moving company to pack and ship my essential belongings. I contacted my landlord about breaking my lease. Thankfully, I was month to month at that point. I set up mail forwarding, opened a new bank account at a different bank, and began the process of detaching myself from Boston methodically and thoroughly. I sold furniture I didn't want to ship and donated clothes I hadn't worn in years. Each item removed from my apartment felt like removing a small weight from my shoulders. Throughout this process, I maintained normal contact with my family, our usual perfunctory text messages, a Sunday phone call with Mom where she talked about Emma's graduation preparations for 40 minutes. I didn't mention Seattle. I didn't mention moving. I didn't mention the growing certainty that I was about to walk away from my family entirely. Tyler was the only person I told. We met at our favorite bar the weekend before my parents and Emma were scheduled to leave for the Maldives. "Are you sure about this, Arch?" he asked, concern evident in his expression. "Completely cutting contact is extreme." "I'm not saying it's forever," I replied, though in that moment I couldn't imagine wanting to reconnect. "I just need to exist somewhere where I'm not constantly reminded of my place in the hierarchy." "What about Jessica? She's not as bad as your parents." I shrugged. "She's complicit. She sees how they treat me and says nothing." Tyler nodded slowly. "What can I tell them when they start looking for you? Because they will, eventually. Just say you know I'm safe but respect my privacy. Don't tell them where I am, even if they guess." And if they think something horrible happened to you? I had considered this. I'll send an email after a few weeks, just to say I'm alive and chose to leave. Nothing more. The night before my parents and Emma were scheduled to depart, Mom called me. "We're all packed for tomorrow," she announced without asking how I was. "Emma's so excited." "I'm sure she is," I replied neutrally. "We'll bring you back a souvenir," she added, as if that were adequate compensation for being excluded. "Thanks." There was a brief pause, one of those rare moments where Mom seemed to sense something was off. "Is everything okay, Archie? You sound strange." For a second, I considered telling her everything, how hurt I was, how overlooked I felt, how I was about to disappear from their lives. But what would be the point? 3 decades of patterns don't change in one conversation. "I'm fine," I said, "just tired from work." "Well, you should take better care of yourself, get more sleep. Then, predictably, you'll understand when you're older how important self-care is." There it was again, that dismissive phrase that assumed I was somehow less mature, less knowing, less valid than she was. It strengthened my resolve. "Have a great trip," I said, knowing it would be the last time I spoke to her for a very long time. "Thanks, honey. We'll send pictures." I spent my final night in Boston packing the last of my belongings into labeled boxes. The moving company would come 2 days later. My suitcases were ready for my flight to Seattle the next afternoon. I'd timed it perfectly. They would be in the air on their way to paradise, while I was in the air on my way to my new life. The house key sat heavy in my pocket. I'd kept it all these years, though I rarely used it. Tomorrow, I would return it, along with a note containing the only message I felt they deserved. Dawn broke over Boston with the kind of perfect early summer day that usually filled me with optimism. I'd slept surprisingly well, as if my body recognized that a burden was about to be lifted. My apartment looked strange, half empty, boxes stacked in corners, walls bare where pictures had hung. I had one last task before my afternoon flight. I showered, dressed, and drove to my parents' house, timing my arrival for when I knew they'd be gone. Their flight to the Maldives departed at 8 a.m., which meant they would have left for the airport by 6. It was now 9:30. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Large colonial and Tudor homes set back from the street, mature trees providing shade, perfectly maintained lawns testifying to the army of landscapers employed in this zip code. I parked in the driveway rather than the street, no longer concerned about adhering to my mother's preferences. I used my key one last time, stepping into the foyer that smelled of the expensive candles Mom always kept burning. The house was silent in a way it never was when occupied. No Mom on the phone, no Dad watching financial news too loudly, no Emma's music or laughter. I walked through the downstairs rooms slowly, taking a final mental inventory. The formal living room we rarely used, except for Mom's social gatherings. The family room with its enormous television and uncomfortable decorative couches. The kitchen where Mom planned meals, but our housekeeper actually prepared them. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet from some luxury resort, was the itinerary for their Maldives trip. 15 days at the Soneva Jani Resort. Private butler service. Underwater restaurant reservations. Spa treatments. Snorkeling excursions. Every detail meticulously planned by Mom, every experience designed to celebrate Emma's achievement while simultaneously showcasing the family's prosperity. I removed the key from my keychain and placed it on the kitchen table. From my pocket, I withdrew the note I'd written and rewritten a dozen times before settling on 3 simple words that conveyed everything I needed to say. I understand now. No lengthy explanation, no emotional outpouring, no desperate plea for attention. Just an acknowledgement that I finally understood what they'd been showing me my entire life, that I was peripheral, an afterthought, a supporting character in the story of my sisters. I placed the note beside the key and took one last look around. Oddly, I felt no sadness, no second thoughts. Just a calm certainty that I was making the right choice. The drive to my apartment, the final check of my packed belongings, the cab ride to Logan Airport, all passed in a surreal blur. I remember sitting at the gate, watching families and couples and solo travelers hurrying past, wondering how many were escaping something versus running towards something new. For me, it was both. The 5-hour flight gave me time to reflect on what I was leaving behind and what might lie ahead. The strange thing was how little anxiety I felt. Sadness, yes. Anger, Certainly, but mostly relief, as if I'd been holding my breath for 31 years and could finally exhale. Seattle greeted me with overcast skies and a light drizzle, the perfect metaphor for my emotional state. I took a cab to my new apartment in Fremont, a furnished short-term rental I'd arranged until my belongings arrived. The building was nothing special, just a modern mid-rise with decent amenities, but it was mine. A space where no one had preconceived notions about me, where no comparisons lurked in every conversation. That first night in Seattle, I stood at my window overlooking the neighborhood below. Lights from restaurants and bars glowed in the misty evening. People walked dogs, couples held hands, friends gathered at pubs. Normal life continuing while mine had been completely uprooted by my own choice. I'd turned off my phone before boarding the plane in Boston and hadn't turned it back on. The silence was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely disconnected from the family dynamics that had defined me. The next morning, I reported to the Seattle office of my company. My new colleagues welcomed me warmly, curious about the Boston transplant, but respectfully unprobing. I introduced myself simply as Archie Matthews, lead developer on the healthcare project. No mention of being the overlooked middle child, the less favored son, the afterthought. Here, I was just Archie, valued for my skills and contributions. My apartment slowly transformed from an anonymous rental to something resembling home. I purchased only what I needed: a comfortable reading chair, some kitchen essentials, a better desk for my work-from-home days. The minimalism felt cleansing after years of living among the excessive possessions that my mother valued as status symbols. I joined a local gym, found a coffee shop I liked for weekend mornings, discovered a hiking trail just outside the city that offered spectacular views of Mount Rainier on clear days. Simple pleasures that belonged solely to me, untainted by comparisons or family expectations. 2 weeks into my new life, I purchased a new phone with a new number. I kept my old phone, occasionally turning it on to see the mounting messages and missed calls, but never responding. Through Tyler's secure email, we'd arranged a communication system that couldn't be traced back to me. I learned that my family had returned from their trip to find the key and note. Their confusion had quickly turned to alarm, then panic when they discovered my apartment empty and my phone unanswered. Tyler reported that they'd filed a missing person report, but the police quickly determined I had left voluntarily after checking my bank records and flight information. My parents were oscillating between anger. How could he be so selfish and dramatic? And genuine concern. What if something happened to him after he moved? I felt a twinge of guilt at their worry, but it was overshadowed by the realization that they were primarily concerned with how my disappearance affected them, the inconvenience, the social embarrassment, the disruption to their carefully controlled family narrative. In my third week in Seattle, I sent a brief email to my family from an anonymous account. I am safe. I left voluntarily. Please respect my decision for space and do not try to find me. It was the minimum required to prevent them from genuinely fearing for my safety, nothing more. Tyler told me my mother had broken down, crying upon receiving it. My father had hired a private investigator who found nothing, and Emma had begun questioning our parents about how they had treated me over the years. It was the first time I'd heard of Emma showing any awareness of the family's dynamics. Jessica, interestingly, had been the most understanding, telling our parents, if Archie felt he needed to completely start over, we should ask ourselves why instead of just trying to drag him back. I absorbed these updates with emotional detachment, as if hearing about characters in a TV show rather than my actual family. The distance, both physical and emotional, allowed me to see the dysfunctional patterns more clearly than ever. And with each passing day in Seattle, I built a life that existed completely independent of those patterns. Through Tyler's updates over the next several months, I pieced together my family's reaction to my disappearance. The narrative unfolded like a play I was watching from a safe distance, both familiar and strange at once. My mother had returned from the Maldives tanned and relaxed, stepping into the house with shopping bags full of souvenirs, already launching into stories about the underwater restaurant and Emma's parasailing adventure. It was Dad who noticed the key, and note first, apparently sitting untouched on the kitchen table for 15 days. "What's this?" he'd asked, interrupting Mom's enthusiastic recounting of their dolphin-watching excursion. Mom had glanced over dismissively. Probably something from the housekeeper, but Dad had already read the note. "I understand now. It's from Archie. This is his house key." That was when the first call to my phone went straight to voicemail. Then another, and another. Mom had called my workplace the next morning, only to be told that I had transferred to another office, but that they couldn't disclose the location due to company policy. This was when the first ripple of genuine concern had apparently passed through my mother. "Something's wrong," she'd told Dad. "Archie wouldn't just leave without telling us." The irony, of course, was that I had been telling them for years, through my silent acceptance of being overlooked, through my dwindling participation in family events, through the resigned way I'd stopped sharing my achievements. They just hadn't been listening. Jessica and Emma were summoned to the house for an emergency family meeting. They drove to my apartment together, only to find it completely emptied, the landlord informing them that I had moved out, leaving no forwarding address. "Did something happen at that dinner before we left?" Emma had apparently asked, the first indication that she had any awareness of the family dynamics. He seemed really quiet when I was talking about the graduation trip. Mom had dismissed this. He was probably just tired from work. "You know, Archie, he's never been very expressive." Or maybe, Jessica had suggested carefully, "He was hurt that you're taking Emma on a luxury vacation for graduating law school when he got a watch for finishing his master's program." "That's completely different," Mom had protested. "Emma's achievement is no more significant than Archie's was," Jessica had interrupted, surprising everyone, including herself, with her sudden defense of me. "Maybe less so, considering he worked full-time while getting his degree, and Emma had your financial support throughout school." This had apparently led to the first of many tense family discussions about the way I had been treated over the years. Dad, in a rare moment of assertiveness, had pointed out that they had spent 3 times as much on Emma's education as they had on mine, despite my better grades and scholarship offers. The missing person report filed with the Boston police had been quickly resolved when they traced my flight to Seattle and verified with my company that I had requested the transfer voluntarily. But this information only created more questions for my family. Why Seattle? Why leave without a word? Why cut off all contact? My mother had cycled through various explanations: a mental breakdown, a woman I was following, a desire to hurt them deliberately. She couldn't seem to accept the simplest explanation, that I had removed myself from a family system that caused me pain. The private investigator my father hired had tracked me as far as my new employer's Seattle office, but hit a wall there. I had been careful to leave minimal digital footprints, paying cash where possible, using my new phone for all communications, avoiding social media entirely. Tyler became their only tenuous connection to me, and he maintained the story we had agreed upon. He knew I was safe, but had promised to respect my privacy. He reported that my mother had alternated between trying to charm information out of him and accusing him of helping me hurt the family. "She doesn't get it at all," Tyler told me during one of our secure email exchanges. "She keeps saying things like, 'What did we ever do to deserve this?' And, 'After everything we've given him.' It's like she's living in an alternate reality." Emma, surprisingly, had been doing some serious reflection. According to Tyler, she had started therapy and had been asking questions about our childhood, seemingly trying to understand the dynamics she had benefited from, but never questioned. "I think your disappearance really shook her," Tyler wrote. "She told me she's been looking through old photos and family videos, and she can see it now how differently you were treated. She said she feels guilty for never noticing." This information stirred complicated feelings. Part of me was gratified that at least one family member was gaining insight. Another part felt bitter that it took my complete disappearance for this awareness to develop. Mostly, though, I felt disconnected from it all, as if we were discussing characters in a novel rather than people who shared my DNA. 6 months after my departure, my mother attempted a new strategy, a heartfelt email sent to my old account, which I still checked occasionally. "Archie, darling," she wrote, "whatever we've done to hurt you, we're deeply sorry. Please come home so we can make things right. We miss you terribly and just want to know you're okay." It was the kind of message that might have once sent me rushing back, eager for the crumbs of affection I had been conditioned to accept as a feast. Now, from the perspective of half a year of independence, I could see it for what it was: manipulative, vague, and still centered on their feelings rather than my experience. I didn't respond. By this point, my life in Seattle had begun to take genuine shape. My work was going well, my apartment felt like home, and I had made a few casual friends through a photography meetup group I'd joined. I was building a life based on my own interests and values, rather than constantly adjusting myself to fit into the negative space left by my sisters. The holiday season brought another wave of attempts at contact cards, emails, even a package sent to my workplace, which I returned unopened. I spent Christmas Day hiking alone in the snow-covered Cascade Mountains, taking photographs of the winter landscape and feeling a strange mixture of melancholy and peace. Tyler reported that it had been the most subdued Christmas in Matthew's family history. Your mom tried to maintain the usual traditions, but apparently Emma refused to participate in the annual family photo, saying it wasn't a complete family without you there. Your dad drank too much scotch and ended up telling your mom that her perfectionism had cost them a son. I absorbed this information with detached interest. Their pain was real, I knew, but so had mine been for 31 years. The difference was that they had chosen to create our family dynamic, while I had merely been born into it. As the new year began, I received word through Tyler that the family's approach was shifting. The private investigator had been called off. The desperate messages had slowed. Jessica had apparently told our parents, if Archie wants to be found, he'll reach out. Until then, we need to respect his choice and maybe do some serious thinking about why he felt he needed to leave in the first place. It was the beginning of a new phase 1, where they began to accept that I wasn't coming back on their terms and perhaps to genuinely reflect on the patterns that had led to this outcome. As I approached the 6-month anniversary of my arrival in Seattle, I found myself settling into rhythms that felt authentically mine. My apartment had evolved from a temporary space to a true home, decorated simply but with purpose, photography books stacked on coffee tables, local artwork on walls, a comfortable sectional sofa where I could sprawl with a book on rainy weekends. Work had become more than just a job. It was a source of genuine satisfaction. The healthcare system I was developing had moved from concept to beta testing, with early results suggesting it could significantly improve patient outcomes. My team respected my leadership, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting to be seen or heard. My contributions were valued on their merits alone. The Pacific Northwest had worked its way into my soul. I joined a hiking group that explored a different trail each weekend, challenging myself physically while discovering breathtaking landscapes. I bought proper rain gear and embraced the Seattle drizzle, finding beauty in mist-covered mornings and the way light filtered through evergreen forests. Tyler remained my connection to Boston, our secure email exchanges providing updates on my family while allowing me to maintain my distance. The pattern of their reactions had evolved from panic to anger to a kind of mournful acceptance. Your mom's telling people you're finding yourself in Europe, Tyler reported. I think it's easier for her to create a narrative she can control than to admit you left because of how they treated you. Dad, according to Tyler, had become unexpectedly introspective. He asked me to get a drink last week, just the two of us. He wanted to know if you seemed happier now. I told him you seemed more at peace, and he just nodded and said, that's something at least. Emma had apparently dived deep into family therapy, confronting our mother about the blatant favoritism she had benefited from throughout our lives. She's really doing the work, Tyler wrote. It doesn't erase the past, but it's something. Jessica had maintained a more pragmatic approach, telling our parents, he's a grown man who made a choice. We need to respect it, even if we don't like it. Of all my family members, she seemed the least surprised by my departure, as if she had always seen the fractures that would eventually break open. These updates no longer stirred the intense emotions they once had. I could process them with a sense of detachment that would have been impossible while living within the family system. My therapy sessions, which I had begun shortly after arriving in Seattle, helped me understand that this emotional distance was not coldness but self-protection, a necessary boundary between my new life and the dynamics that had diminished me. 7 months into my Seattle life, I met Ellie at a photography exhibit downtown. She was a graphic designer with warm eyes and a genuine laugh who didn't need to fill silence with chatter. Our first date stretched from coffee to dinner to a late-night walk along the waterfront. Unlike previous relationships, I didn't feel the need to impress her or hide parts of myself. When she asked about my family, I gave her a simplified version of the truth. We're estranged. It was a necessary separation. She didn't push for more details, just nodded and said, families are complicated. Sometimes distance is the healthiest choice. Her acceptance of this boundary without judgment felt like a gift. As our relationship developed, I gradually shared more about my past, finding that voicing my experiences to someone who hadn't been part of them helped solidify my own understanding. Ellie listened without trying to fix or minimize, offering perspective without invalidating my feelings. "It sounds like you were the family scapegoat," she said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. It's a common dynamic in dysfunctional families. One child becomes the repository for all the negative projections, while another becomes the golden child who can do no wrong. "That's exactly what it was," I agreed, the psychological framework helping me see that what had happened wasn't my fault, wasn't something wrong with me, but a system I had been trapped in. My therapy sessions continued to provide insights. Dr. Harmon helped me recognize the ways I had internalized my family's valuation, the subtle self-sabotage and hesitancy that stemmed from believing I was less worthy than my sisters. With her guidance, I began to challenge these beliefs, to recognize my own worth independent of external validation. "Notice how much easier it is to see your value now that you're not constantly being compared to your sisters," she pointed out during one session. "That's not coincidence. Environment shapes perception, both how others perceive us and how we perceive ourselves." In my 8th month away, I received an email from Emma, not through Tyler, but directly to my old account. Unlike Mom's emotional manipulations, Emma's message was straightforward. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family and how we treated you. I was too young and self-centered to see it clearly before, but looking back, I can see how unfair it was. I benefited from Mom and Dad's favoritism my entire life without questioning it. I'm sorry, Archie. I know an apology doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know that I see it now, and I'm working on becoming a better person and a better sister. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure, no expectations. Just an open door, if you ever choose to walk through it." I read the message several times, surprised by the emotions it stirred. There was no demand for forgiveness, no plea for my return, just a simple acknowledgement of wrongs and an open door left ajar. I saved the email but didn't respond immediately, needing time to process what it meant to me. At work, my healthcare project gained attention from industry publications. I was invited to speak at a tech conference, presenting our solution to an audience of developers and healthcare professionals. Standing on that stage, explaining the complex systems we had built, and seeing the genuine interest in the room, I felt a confidence that had always eluded me in Boston. My mother would have found a way to diminish this achievement, to compare it unfavorably to something Jessica or Emma had done. My father would have listened with half an ear, offering generic praise without true understanding. Here my accomplishment stood on its own merits, undiminished by comparison. After the conference, my boss called me into her office. "The presentation was excellent, Archie. We're expanding the healthcare division, and I'd like you to take on a director role. It would mean a significant promotion and salary increase." 2 years ago, such an offer would have filled me with insecurity, with doubts about whether I deserved it or could handle it. Now I accepted it with simple gratitude and confidence. Thank you. I'm excited for the challenge. As the holidays approached again, Ellie invited me to join her family for Thanksgiving. "No pressure," she said, "but my parents are pretty normal, as families go. They argue about politics sometimes, but generally treat each other with respect." I accepted, curious about how a healthy family holiday might feel. The experience was revelatory. Her parents disagreed occasionally, but listened to each other's perspectives. Ellie and her brother teased each other, but with obvious underlying affection. No one kept score of perceived slights or contributions. No one was elevated above others or diminished for not meeting impossible standards. It wasn't perfect. Her grandmother made a few tone-deaf comments. Her father drank a bit too much wine, but the fundamental respect for each individual's personhood remained intact throughout. I left understanding more clearly what had been missing in my own family. Not just equal treatment, but basic recognition of individual worth. During my therapy session the following week, I shared an insight that had been forming slowly. I think what hurt most wasn't that they loved Emma more, it was that they didn't seem to see me at all, not as a person separate from their expectations or comparisons. Dr. Harmon nodded. "That's profound, Archie. Being unseen is its own form of trauma." As Christmas approached, I considered my options carefully. I could ignore it entirely, create new traditions with Ellie, or acknowledge my family in some small way. After much reflection, I decided to send gifts to Tyler and Emma, a thank you to the former for his unwavering friendship, and a tentative acknowledgement to the latter of her efforts to change. For Emma, I chose a book on family systems theory that had helped me understand our dynamics, inscribed simply, "For Emma, I received your email. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I'm listening. Archie." It was a small crack in the wall I had built, a tiny opening that acknowledged her growth while maintaining my necessary boundaries. Tyler reported that Emma had cried upon receiving it, telling our parents, "He's alive, he's okay, and he's thinking about us. That's enough for now." As my first year away from Boston approached its end, I realized I had built something precious in Seattle, not just a life, but a self. A version of Archie Matthews defined by his own choices and values, rather than by his position in a dysfunctional family hierarchy. It wasn't about erasing my past, but about ensuring it no longer dictated my future. I celebrated this milestone with a small dinner party in my apartment, Ellie, a few colleagues who had become friends, neighbors I had grown close to. As we raised glasses in a toast to the new year, I looked around at these people who knew me only as I was now, not as the overlooked middle child or the less favored son, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. To new beginnings, I said, and to the freedom to define ourselves. The one-year anniversary of my disappearance arrived on a clear Seattle spring day. I took the day off work and hiked to a viewpoint overlooking the city and Puget Sound beyond. The physical exertion felt like an appropriate way to mark the occasion, a reminder of how far I'd climbed, literally and figuratively, from the person I had been in Boston. Sitting on a rocky outcrop, watching ferries cross the Sound against a backdrop of snow-capped Olympic mountains, I made a decision I had been contemplating for weeks. It was time to respond to Emma. Not to re-enter the family system as it had been, but to acknowledge her efforts and perhaps build something new on our own terms. That evening, I composed a careful email. "Emma, thank you for your message and for the work you're doing to understand our family dynamics. I appreciate your recognition of the patterns that shaped our childhood and your willingness to examine your role in them. I'm not ready for a full reconciliation with the family, but I would be open to a conversation with just you as a first step. If you're willing, we could meet in Portland next month, neutral territory for both of us. Take care, Archie." Her response came the next morning, simple, respectful of my boundaries, but clearly emotional. "Archie, thank you for responding. Portland sounds perfect. Just name the date and I'll be there. This means more than I can express. Emma." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Portland on a Saturday in late April. I drove down from Seattle the night before, staying in a hotel and giving myself plenty of time to prepare emotionally for this first family contact in over a year. The coffee shop was busy but not crowded, with enough ambient noise for privacy without having to strain to hear each other. I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner table and ordering a black coffee that I didn't touch, too nervous to risk adding caffeine to my already heightened state. Emma arrived exactly on time, scanning the room before her eyes landed on me. She had lost weight, and her usual perfectly styled appearance seemed more subdued. She approached hesitantly, clearly unsure of the protocol. Was this a hugging situation or not? I stood but didn't move toward her, and she respected this boundary, sliding into the seat across from me with a tentative smile. "It's really good to see you, Archie," she said, her voice catching slightly. "You look healthy, happy, even." "I am," I confirmed. "Happier than I've been in a long time. Seattle agrees with me." She nodded, twisting her coffee cup in her hands. "I've been rehearsing what to say to you for months, and now I can't remember any of it." "Maybe start with why you wanted to meet," I suggested gently. She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize in person, not just for my obliviousness all these years, but for actively participating in a family system that hurt you. I was so wrapped up in being Mom's favorite that I never questioned why that position existed or what it cost you." Her directness surprised me. The Emma I had known had been charming but somewhat superficial, skilled at deflecting anything uncomfortable. "When did you start to see it?" I asked. "Honestly, when we got back from the Maldives and found your note. At first I was just shocked and worried. But then, as weeks passed and we realized you had planned this carefully, I started thinking about why. I began looking back at our family photos, our holidays, the way Mom and Dad talked to each of us. It was like suddenly seeing a pattern that had been there all along but invisible to me. She continued, describing her therapy journey, the difficult conversations with our parents, the gradual and painful awareness of her own complicity in a harmful system. Mom still doesn't fully get it, she admitted. She acknowledges that maybe there was some favoritism but insists it wasn't intentional or significant. Dad understands better. He's been doing his own therapy, trying to figure out why he allowed Mom's behavior to go unchecked for so long. I listened, not interrupting, allowing her to share her perspective without immediately accepting or rejecting it. When she finished, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Thank you for saying all that," I finally said. "It means something that you can see it now. For a long time, I thought I was crazy or overly sensitive because no one else acknowledged what seemed so obvious to me." "You weren't crazy," Emma said firmly. "We were wrong, all of us." We talked for nearly 3 hours, ordering lunch when coffee no longer seemed sufficient. I shared limited details about my life in Seattle, my work, my photography, hobby, a carefully edited version of my relationship with Ellie. Emma told me about her new job at a public defender's office rather than the corporate law firm our mother had always envisioned. "It doesn't pay as well, but it feels meaningful," she explained. "And it was important to me to make a choice Mom didn't orchestrate." As our meeting drew to a close, Emma asked the question I had been expecting. "Do you think you'll ever want to see Mom and Dad again?" I considered my answer carefully. "I don't know. I'm not closing that door permanently, but I'm not ready yet. This meeting, just you, was a big step for me." She nodded, accepting this boundary. "Would it be okay if we stayed in touch? Maybe emails or occasional calls? No pressure to respond to everything, or immediately." "I think I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the realization that it was true. We parted with an awkward but genuine hug, both of us a little teary, but in a cleansing rather than devastating way. Over the following months, Emma and I maintained cautious but increasingly comfortable communication. She respected my boundaries, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, sharing family news without manipulation or guilt-tripping. Through her, I learned that Jessica had been supportive of my decision all along, telling our parents, "Archie did what he needed to do for his own well-being. We should respect that instead of making it about us." I gained new appreciation for my older sister's perspective. 6 months after meeting Emma, I agreed to a video call with Jessica. It was surprisingly easy. She had always been the most independent family member, the least enmeshed in Mom's unhealthy dynamics. We talked mostly about our respective work, cautiously rebuilding a relationship based on adult mutual respect rather than shared childhood trauma. My life in Seattle continued to flourish. Ellie and I moved in together, combining our belongings in a larger apartment with a view of the canal. My work earned industry recognition, and I was invited to speak at conferences around the country. I developed friendships that felt equal and reciprocal, not colored by the constant sense of being less than that had pervaded my Boston relationships. Through therapy, I came to understand that while my family's treatment had profoundly affected me, it didn't have to define me. I could acknowledge the pain without remaining trapped in it, recognize the patterns without perpetuating them. 18 months after my disappearance, I made another difficult decision. I agreed to meet my parents, but on my terms, in Seattle, with Emma and Jessica present as buffers. I suggested a weekend visit where we would meet in public spaces rather than the intimacy of my home, maintaining boundaries while opening a door to possible reconciliation. They accepted these terms without argument, which itself represented significant growth. The old Catherine Matthews would have insisted on controlling every aspect of such a reunion. The meeting was as awkward and emotional as I had anticipated. My mother, always impeccably put together, seemed smaller somehow, more uncertain. My father, usually happy to fade into the background, stepped forward to hug me first, whispering, "I'm so sorry, son," with a crack in his voice that told me he meant it. Mom tried to maintain her composure but broke down when attempting to explain herself. "I never meant to hurt you," she said through tears. "I thought I was being a good mother to all of you." "You were a good mother in many ways," I acknowledged, "but you also created a family system where one child was elevated and another diminished. Whether you meant to or not, that caused real harm." She nodded, not defending or denying, which was progress I hadn't expected. We didn't resolve everything in that weekend visit. Decades of dysfunctional patterns can't be undone in a few conversations. But we established a new foundation, one where my autonomy was respected, where I could engage with my family on my own terms rather than according to their expectations. After they returned to Boston, I maintained the boundaries I had established: limited contact, no obligation to participate in family events that didn't feel healthy, permission to prioritize my own well-being over family expectations. To my surprise, these boundaries were largely respected, especially by my father, who seemed genuinely committed to changing his enabling behaviors. 2 years after leaving that house key on the kitchen table, I hosted a dinner in my Seattle apartment: my parents, both sisters, Ellie, and a few close friends. It wasn't perfect. Mom still occasionally slipped into old patterns. Dad still sometimes failed to intervene when needed, but the fundamental dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the overlooked middle child, but a grown man who had built a life on his own terms. After dinner, as everyone gathered in the living room, Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To Archie," he said, "who had the courage to show us what we couldn't see ourselves. I'm sorry it took losing you to make us understand, but I'm grateful for the chance to know the man you've become." Looking around at this gathering, part family of origin, part chosen family, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible 2 years earlier. The journey from invisible middle child to self-defined adult had been painful but necessary, not just for me but perhaps for my entire family. That night, after everyone had left and Ellie and I were cleaning up, she asked, "Are you okay?" That was a lot. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I finally said. Not because everything's perfect now, but because I know who I am regardless of how they see me. That's the real freedom. The phrase my mother had used so dismissively throughout my childhood, "You'll understand when you're older," had proven true in a way she never intended. I did understand now, not just the dysfunctional patterns that had shaped my early life, but also my own power to break those patterns and create something new. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between staying in a toxic situation or walking away from people you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and self-discovery. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when it feels impossible. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own path to healing.